Welcome to everybody for the final panel discussion of the 2021 Art Song Innovation in Art Song Summit. It's really fantastic to have you all here. Very, very special to have gotten through this weekend with so many incredible conversations and so many wonderful ideas of where art song has come from, where it is, and where it might be going. And hopefully, all of you have had an opportunity to see and immerse yourself in and interact with The Wandering. A really fabulous, in my opinion, an absolutely fabulous and very groundbreaking production on so many different levels with so many things to speak to us in terms of where any art form, frankly, could go. And that sort of immersive transmedia, I love the idea of like a transmedia experience was very special. Before we go into this evening's panel discussion, I just want to quickly say a few thank yous. This has been a voyage of discovery for three people in particular, myself, Colin Knapp, and Spencer Boyd. They have both been absolutely incredible. Very much colleagues in a voyage of discovery, certainly not in any way assistants, because they bring together, they bring to the table a level of professionalism and administrative virtuosity that I have rarely seen in the projects that I've done before. So I just want to have a round of applause for both of them in what they've been able to achieve in the past few weeks. Likewise, I just want to thank Indiana University for giving us the opportunity to present to you both the Wandering and also the Summit. The Office of the Vice President for Research was very kind in allowing us to have some funding. And Ed Commentale in particular, who's one of the real leaders on campus for intersectionality with the arts and leading a very interesting project at Indiana University with the Arts and Humanities Council, how it engages both on campus and in rural communities around Indiana. So I want to thank Ed Commentale in particular for believing in this project and enabling us to get some grant funding for this. Also want to just thank the Jacob School of Music, the Voice Department, Brian Horn, Julia Bentley, Alan Armstrong, and Brian Gill, who have been absolutely great in partnering with us, providing sage advice when sometimes we went off the rails and brought us back on again, and really just being a wonderful partner in making this possible. Also want to thank my colleagues in the Office of Entrepreneurship and Career Development, Joni Spain, Nathan Fisher, the Project Jumpstart team for supporting this project as well. So those are the thanks, but especially Colin and Spencer, I want to just really thank you for the amount of work that you put into this. That said, I'm going to now introduce Jeremy Weiss, who you all know as one of the brainchilds behind this this incredible production. And he's got Callista with him as well, but I'm going to just hand it over to him. But before I do so, I want to say that Jeremy, likewise, a product of the Jacob School of Music, I'm happy to say, a fabulous singer, as you already know, and also launching a project that very early in his career that I believe will lay the foundation for many, many other projects to come. So I just want to applaud you, Jeremy, for jumping into this type of work. And for being with us today and for enabling us to partner with you on such a fabulous project. So welcome, Jeremy.
Yay. Thank you so much, Alain. Yeah, I really first want to thank you and Ed Commentale and the whole Innovation Art Song Summit for featuring The Wandering, and your support for this project has truly been invaluable. So thank you so much. Tonight, we're excited to discuss the piece with you. I'm actually going to share my screen. We've prepared, if you can let me do that, Colin. I've prepared a short little presentation. Anyway, so
we'll get there in a second.
Are we good to go? Let's see. Yay. Okay, good. Great. Tonight, we're excited to discuss the piece with you. What you've seen over the last couple of days is not the final version of the piece. It is a very late draft of the piece that premieres on April 15th. This version of the piece, the piece that premieres on April 15th, includes interactive art sent directly to your home through the mail, and tickets are available for that version now on our website at experiencethewandering.com. We hope you'll buy a ticket and help us spread the word. First, I'll have the team members who helped join us today introduce themselves. Can each of you introduce yourself, your role in the project, and what kind of art you typically make? I'll start. I'm Jeremy Weiss, the vocalist, the wanderer, and co-creative director of The Wandering. I'm a baritone. I specialize in new and devised work and art song, and that's what I typically do. Callista?
Hi, I'm Callista Small. I'm the co-creative director of this project. I'm trained as an actor and I have a lot of experience making contemporary experimental work. Charlotte, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes, happy to. I'm Charlotte McCurdy. I'm an industrial designer in my background, so I focus on making things. And my role in this piece was to be part of the devising team, thinking about how to craft this story so that it would, from the start, have an idea of what the objects, the transmedia components might be, and how those ideas would inform the design of the show. And so it's trans crossing all of this cross-cutting. But I'm a designer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tantan, would you like to say hi?
Hello, everyone. I'm Tantan. I'm the web designer of the show, and so kind of my role is to kind of take these ideas that the devising team has come up with and translate that into a web experience. So it's been really fun building. I just graduated from Yale, and I majored in computing the arts, which is a hybrid major between computer science and art. So it's been really exciting to really just, dive straight into something that I really love doing right off the gate.
And Marika, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Marika. I am a pianist and I'm actually currently a student at IU. I'm in my last semester of coursework in my doctorate here. And I had the wonderful fortune of working with Jeremy early on with creating the music of all of this. So we rehearsed a lot and took a lot of time recording, and yeah, I'm so excited to be here.
Thanks so much, guys. Thanks so much, team. Yay. Callista and I will start by discussing the creative process of this project. I think it makes sense to start in May of 2020, a time when I remember reading that live performances wouldn't resume until fall of 2021, which still seems to be likely. I couldn't imagine a year and a half without performance, and I knew that I needed to perform. So I turned to Schubert's music. His music was the reason I pursued classical music, after being inspired by Schubertiads with one of my best friend's parents. Originally, I thought I would do a Zoom performance of Die Schöne Müllerin, where Marika would record the piano, I would sing over her recorded tracks, and I would invite family and friends. When I started rehearsing the music and envisioning the performance, I realized that was going to be kind of boring for me and for my audience. I didn't think I could even persuade my uncle to come see me sing German on Zoom for an hour, because I realized that over Zoom, the intimacy and magic of live art song performance that we all love so much is lost. So I started to think about other possibilities. I wondered if I could divide the songs up into shorter experiences or episodes. I wondered if I could send people letters in the mail. So I called up Callista Small, one of the most creative theater makers that I know. We got on the phone, and Callista was immediately on board.
Great.
We started brainstorming. We knew we wanted to use art song because it was originally purposed for performances in people's living rooms, the only venue that we had. We knew we wanted to make a film. We knew we wanted it to involve audience interaction, probably including shipping them objects in the mail. And we also knew that we didn't want to use Zoom. So I called up Marika, our pianist, who was also on board and excited about the project. I called up Jared O'Brien, another IU alumnus, to be our sound designer. And I called up Professor Brian Gill at IU, my voice teacher, who was a huge part of this project, and he was also on board to help produce the album. Callista brought on Christine Shaw, who specializes in making new collaborative performances. After Christine listened to Die Schöne Müllerin, we got on a Zoom call where she asked me, "What's good about this?" She said that the stereotypical gender roles in the piece seemed extremely problematic. Christine also asked why anyone would perform this piece today. I talked a lot about the music, but she wasn't buying it. I spent a lot of time reflecting, and I realized that while Die Schöne Müllerin has a lot of artistic value, it's hard to present through film in a way that doesn't reinforce gender stereotypes. And while it might be the right project for another team, it wasn't the right project for us. So Christine asked me to create a presentation for her about why I love art song. That's how this piece started. I talked about why art song is personal for me. Crying on a subway, listening to Du bist die Ruhe, or drinking with my friends and singing Ständchen around a piano. How it's empowering to connect with the career past through Schubert's music, and why these songs are so good. What makes Schubert amazing? The way he creates images through his music, his honesty and vulnerability, the universal humanness of his expression. We listened to specific songs, we closed our eyes, I cried. Then Marika, Christine, and Callista and I got together and chose the songs that were important to us. And that is still the list of 12 songs that we're using in The Wandering. Then we started devising the piece. Callista, do you want to talk a little bit about that process?
Yes, here we go. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about this very important concept. Creativity is born from constraint. And I'll explain why this is very relevant to the process of making the show. So what do I mean by creativity is born from constraint? I'm going to give an example. So let's say I asked you to tell me a story about something in your life, and that's it. So if everybody right now on the call could just think of a story about something in their life that they would maybe tell, like share to an audience. I'm not going to ask you to do it, but yeah. So it's kind of hard, right? Because even though this prompt is really open-ended, you draw a blank. It's like nothing comes to mind. So now let's add some constraints. So I'd like for you to tell me a short story now about a really moving art song recital that you attended. So if you can start thinking about that, it's much easier to start thinking about stories because there are more constraints to the prompt. So in order to think creatively, you have to have constraints. And the more specific the constraints, the more interesting the result. So for our show, we had a ton of constraints right from the get-go. Our first constraint was obviously the pandemic because live performance venues were closed. And before you change the slide, I just want to explain. So this photo is a little behind the scenes moment of our team. That's Irina Wang. She's not on the call right now. In the middle, our graphic designer. Everyone else is here. We're creating, Charlotte's prototyping the orb that's in the first episode. So that's just a fun behind the scenes moment. Okay, back to creativity and constraint. So then we started coming up with more constraints. So we set thematic constraints, aesthetic constraints, and narrative constraints. Our thematic constraints were to create community across distance, to find wonder in the mundane, and to queer the past into the future. Our main aesthetic constraint was the prism, because a prism is a space where white light is refracted into a rainbow, and a prism also allows you to see wonder in the mundane. We also, our second aesthetic constraint was that of reflection as explored through doubling into your doppelganger. And then we set narrative constraints. We wanted the story to be really easy to follow. We didn't want to have that many characters. And so we based it on the hero's journey. And those are the constraints that we use to make The Wandering. But the reason why it exists right now is because of our incredible team. So we're going to talk more about each of the media that we used and the team members behind those specific media. Here we go.
Thanks, Callista. After Christine, we brought on Zach, our screenwriter, editor, and animator. And we began the process of turning a group of 12 Schubert songs into The Wandering. We worked a lot with the text and music of Schubert's songs, devising images and other activities that we did as a group to mine those texts for what we would use to create the piece, and decided that we didn't want to literally represent what was in them. Rather, we wanted to use the abstraction inherent in classical music as a jumping off point for the show. For example, Rostlose Liebe, the first song in episode 4 that you just watched. We were inspired by these specific lyrics. Along with the lyrics of the whole song, but in these lyrics in particular. I would rather fight through pain than bear so many of life's joys. At this point in the film, the wanderer confronts his doppelganger, who is in love with a beautiful drag queen. Struggling with sexuality and coming out can be painful. Is that what this song is about? Can it be? How do we abstract that? How do we represent it on film? What you saw is our answer. Additionally, to remind you what the music sounds like, this is a recording of Marika warming up for one of our recording sessions. When tasked with capturing the essence of this thrilling roller coaster of a song musically, Laura Panazzati, our film director, had the idea of using a different frame rate, so the action would take place more quickly than the rest of the film. As the music shifts back and forth in tempi and dynamic, Laura wanted to shift back and forth between the two frame rates. So this is an example of how we took Schubert's text and music, mined it for themes and images, and then abstracted it to develop a narrative about queerness and self-discovery.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the 3D part of this show. So we actually couldn't feature the 3D component of this show this weekend, but the full version of the show as it was designed involves an interactive art experience that is shipped to audience members. And this experience also contains opportunities for audience members to connect with each other and the creators of the piece. And so we wanted to capture the feeling that art song performance in someone's living room has, that feeling of presence. And so to do that, we want to engage our audience in the present moment and connect them with each other. And that's the purpose of this interactive package. And we really hope you buy a ticket for the full show. They're available right now on experiencethewandering.com. So just to give you a little preview, here we have a video of one of the prototypes of one of the interactive art objects. This is a mask that resembles the mask that the doppelganger wears in the film. And so you actually get this in the mail, and you got to make it, and then you take a photo of yourself and submit it to the gallery. And then also here we have a prototype of our AR object. I bring up the AR object in this slide because we decided to use AR because there were certain things that we couldn't just ship people in the mail, they'd be too heavy, but we wanted people to have this experience of something wondrous appearing in your living room, having a piece of the prism appear in your living room that was larger than what we could ship in the mail. And that's why we chose to incorporate AR models. So Charlotte McCurdy, in addition to devising the narrative and being instrumental in many aspects of this project, made the art objects that you received in the mail and also helped us design the AR. And she's here, and you can ask her questions about this part of the show in addition to everything when we're done.
Fantastic. Yay. Okay, now I'd like to talk about the web experience piece that Tantan helped devise. Every show needs a theater. And because our theater is the internet, we wanted to be part of the artistic experience of the show. Tantan and our team worked with us over the past year to build and design the website that you all have experienced. We wanted it to have character and depth. We wanted it to feel three-dimensional. We wanted the experience of interacting with it to involve discovery. We hope we achieved that and more. So that's the little introduction to our piece and our process that Callista and I have prepared. And we're going to open it up for questions from everybody who is here. I have questions prepared as well for my fellow teammates. I know Marika has to go in about 15 minutes to a rehearsal. So if anybody has any questions for Marika, be sure to ask her a question. I'll start, Marika, by just asking you a question about if you wanted to talk a little bit about the process of recording this material and rehearsing it during the pandemic, and also what that was like for you as a current student too.
Sure. So first off, it was incredibly exciting when Jeremy reached out to me about this project because, you know, as soon as the pandemic hit, I think a huge thing I felt was just shock of like, what is the next performance opportunity? And so for me, having the chance to use all this time this summer to kind of dive into all these Schubert songs that I haven't played, most of them actually, was just like very exciting. So it was, this was such a fun process because Jeremy and I also happened to both live in Virginia. And so we would be practicing on our own, but we safely rehearsed maybe 3 times.
I think even more. It might have been 3 or 4 times that I would drive over to Williamsburg
Yeah.
and both be wearing masks on opposite sides of your living room, like 30 feet away, and I'd be facing the other direction while you were playing, right? Like, I've never experienced making music in that way, but it was joyous. I had such a great time.
It was wild. It was something I had never experienced before, but we made it work, you know, and I think we were very strategic about focusing on every couple songs, those few rehearsals that we had. And then once this academic year started here, I think it was in September, maybe end of August, that we decided to start recording all of these songs. So we found an incredible studio, Airtime Studios, and we blocked out like an entire week to record every day for 2-3 hours every session, I believe. And that was an incredibly intense process. I had never done a serious recording project before. And also just given the constraints of the pandemic was its own thing. But that was just a very intense process, and it was very quick too. Like 2 hours goes by like it's like 15 minutes. But yeah.
That really was an amazing part of the experience, Marika. And I mean, I think the experience of making this in a week and making it so quickly. Professor Bentley says, I'd like to hear more about how Marika chose her nominees for the 12 songs, especially since they were all mostly new. That's a really good question.
Yeah, well, I remember we had a big list of Schubert songs, and a lot of them I chose because they were familiar songs to me that I heard a lot of other people play, but I had never gotten the chance to really perform yet. So that was actually a huge reason why I chose a lot of these songs, was because I had the time to really dive into them. And they were songs that I was just very curious about. And thankfully, Jeremy and I think we have very similar tastes. So it was pretty easy to choose all these songs. And it was also interesting. There are some songs where I thought either they were recorded a lot before, so I was trying to advocate to not use them in our recording project as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you remember that session, either of you guys. Like, it was really fun. Marika and I created like a list of about 50 songs, and then we all listened to them and ranked them on our own, and then we voted in the session, and then we all had the opportunity to fight. We were like, if you've got a song you want to fight for, right? I remember like Marika, there was definitely something like Vondra's Nachtlied like made it into the recording because Christine like really fought for it. I mean, I think you fought for Die Gebüsch. There was like a few, like, I think we all had our numbers that we really wanted to fight for, and then that's how the final list.
There wasn't a narrative at all. We were just
no narrative.
The narrative came later.
Songs that we thought would work strongly, I think, in a narrative. Yeah. And we'll see what Professor Bentley wants to say. Also, were there pianistic characters that were just less appealing, or do you always perceive the song as a whole? That's an interesting question.
That is a great question. I never was choosing them for any pianistic characters. I think I was choosing the songs based on its entire structure and how they would fit among the other candidates of songs that we either all had mutually agreed that we wanted to do. And I think it was important to kind of also be open to the kind of audience that was going to be hearing this music, because of course there are going to be classical musicians who would be listening to it who is very familiar with Schubert's Lieder, but there's also going to be listeners who have no experience hearing Schubert songs. So I think it was important for us to choose ones that we found were very characteristic and important to know to people who don't know his music very well. But then for us musicians who are more familiar with his pieces, to maybe highlight songs that can stand alone and not always be performed within their song cycles.
Extremely well said, Marika. I think that's really awesome. So I'm going to open up the floor. Marika, just hang out as long as you can. I'll open up the floor for anybody to ask questions for anybody on the team about the project, the experience of the project. And in the meantime, Charlotte, I'm gonna ask you to talk first. I've got a question. Can you talk a little bit about your work with futurity and how it was relevant to this piece?
Absolutely. I feel like I appreciate that the word translate has already come up in this conversation, because I feel like there was such a desire that you guys were like founding desire of the piece of trying to connect across space, that we were isolated, and how do you create a translation across space and bringing people into that experience of being together, of immediacy, of the visceral theater experience. How do you create that translation? And then with Schubert and the work and his character and history, there's a translation across time. There's an immediacy and connection through the music to a time that is not contemporaneous with us. And that the opportunity that presents to think about not just connecting from the present with the past, but how do we conceive of the future? How is this music also a way of telegraphing and designing a future that we want to create, that that manifests the values and aesthetics that we think are worth nurturing and giving more light and life to. So to me, it seems like, especially with the personal motivation, the passion that the song selection. So when I came to the project, there were basically the 12 songs. So I am one of those people for whom this work is very new. I'm not, don't have much grounding in Schubert's oeuvre, but it seemed like an important thematic, a reason that the project was like necessary, that there was urgency to make it seem to connect to the ways in which there's so much to learn from the past, and there's so much in this music, and there's so much that we want to bring from that into the future, and use to reflect and inform. And that then connected to this desire to engage with the virtual, which is sort of futuristic. It's happening right now. It's part of the pandemic, but finding ways to layer the tangible, the real with the virtual as you're watching this recorded experience that then is connected to physical things that are in your hand that then you're using to virtualize yourself to re-participate in the piece. There's a way in which that is an assertion of sort of where our society seems to be going given our technology, but we're still humans throughout this whole arc and journey, and we are connected by that throughout this whole thing, and we will continue to be these fallible, emotional, expressive humans as we go into the future.
Thank you, Charlotte. I remember you talked with Calista about the project first, and then in our first conversation, I remember this was a lot about kind of what was exciting for you and me about you coming onto the project. Obviously, you had a huge role in a lot of different areas as far as making this piece. But you brought up Cruising Utopia, which is an amazing book about queer futurity that's on my nightstand, and I've been slowly working through it over the course of the year. And I think that was really largely inspirational for us.
Definitely, and just to connect to that, like I was hearing from Jeremy these thematic concerns that connected very much to that Munoz piece of sort of theoretical work, and in talking about futuring is creating a space, not necessarily asserting a future, not necessarily trying to be monolithic, but that just opening up space for possibility. And so I was hearing all these thematic connections, and it seemed like a useful tool to contribute to the scaffolding of the conversation.
Really useful and important as we were, yes, scaffolding is a great word, as we were building this weird sculpture that is The Wandering. I think, Colin, I see your question. I'm going to come to that in a second, but I want to give Tantan a second to speak first. Tantan, the structure of this website is very novel. What was it like to design something like this?
Yeah, I think so. When I first talked with Jeremy, Callista, and actually our executive producer Max, who's I believe is also in this call, something that, well, first of all, like when they tried to break down the show for me and their ideas, it was overwhelming at first, to say the least. It was kind of just like, how is this going to happen, right? And so for kind of where the question of how I was able to kind of contribute was, one of the things we talked about was wanting to explore this concept of Wunderlich when it comes to the web. And that's not very easy, especially when considering a lot of how modern web design goes. Modern web design, I believe, at least, it's more formulaic, it's very structured and defined, and I think for good reasons, especially in kind of an age where getting information out is the most important thing in the fastest way possible. That's kind of the utmost importance. But I think one thing that we all kind of resonated with was the concept of the net art of the 90s and kind of early 2000s. And I think it's really exciting because back then, this kind of art that came in the form of, websites was all about exploring and pushing the boundaries of what you could do within a web browser. And I think that was super exciting to kind of try to harken back to, not just in the final product, but also just during our creative process. I think that was super entertaining and enjoyable to do, just because it's trying to overcome the unknown. You don't know really what you're trying to overcome yet, and you're trying to discover those challenges, right? So at the same time, it was really about kind of, again, channeling all of the kind of concepts that we wanted in the show to mirror in the web experience. We didn't want it to be, for example, just a link to all 4 videos, and that was kind of it. We wanted something more. We wanted an experience that you don't really find anymore, which is, I wouldn't say non-linear, but it's linear with several branches of experiences going on at the same time. And I think that was something that was very hard. For me, I think something that you don't really think about when creating a piece like this for the web is that, modern web browsers are actually significantly more closed off and challenging for someone to create art in compared to, for example, the 90s and 2000s. Back then, you could really do anything you wanted. You could really explore. But again, for good reason, there are so many protections in place for the end user that there are a lot of the most simple things that you actually find yourself not being able to do. And I think a lot of the design and exploration process was just seeing how we could, be sneaky, how we could actually push and, go around corners and, challenge what these browsers have kind of presented towards us as constraints and, applying that towards a piece.
Fantastic, Tantan. Marika, I just want to let you know, if you want to get to your rehearsal, you're totally fine to do that.
Yes.
So thank you so much for being with us today.
Demand.
Whenever you need to go, you can. Okay, awesome. So Tantan, great. Thanks so much for that response. I think a lot of the process of making the web component of this piece was very collaborative also. There were a lot of calls, Charlotte, where you were involved in that too. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of like the idea, I think, which was yours, of having this sort of like 3-dimensional experience with the prism inside of the space?
Sure. We have some good commenty questions too.
Yes.
I do think it was fantastic hearing Marika talk about the process of selecting some of the songs, because it connects with some of the processes on the design side that we went through in terms of advocacy and excitement and quite organic growth. So conceptually, we had been talking about this prism, this refraction, this instead of just a reflection and an inversion, a multiplication of potential. And as you spoke to in your intro presentation, as a way of seeing the wondrous in the mundane. So that was an important figure for us. And then we were working with Irina, the graphic designer, on some of the print materials, and she was playing with this idea of refraction in the print materials. And I was looking at that and I was like, how, like, you've made a prism. There's like a 3D object you've used to distort this imagery. I want to see what is it? Zoom out. Let's get that thing. And she's like, oh no, it's not. It's just not. And like, oh, and this, so then that led us to this 3D object that then was able to feed into and be an object in the film. It was able to be a wayfinding tool in the web, and sort of to have this coherence where, sort of back to what Calista was saying, like, how do you have as much clarity in the narrative so that you can spend time with the emotion of the music? So there's all these sort of coherences that happen. So that if that was your question, Jeremy, the wireframe of the shape of the prism is this, it connects to this process, and it also is a sort of interesting, again, connection to what we've been talking about already in terms of translation, that how it's a wireframe instead of a 3D model, which has to do with the technological limitations of contemporary web design, which we learned from Tantan. But how, so there's one conceptual tool that came up pretty early on was, and it sort of connects to futurity, was the technique of crystallography. So when you're trying to image something that you cannot see, and crystallography is used to form models of molecules, which are too small to photograph. They're smaller than photons. So the way you can do that is by casting shadows. So you can pass X-rays and you can cast a shadow. You can have a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional thing, and through a collection of two-dimensional things, you can come to a concept of that, which is intangible, ineffable, wondrous, strange. It's too sublime to hold in your mind at once. So that how do you capture that and celebrate the wireframe, celebrate the shadow as a tool for accessing the round? Yeah. So that was the website. If that was a coherent.
That was a really great answer to that question.
Thank you.
Yeah, Calista, I'm actually going to ask you a question.
Oh my goodness.
I'm going to ask you Colin's question here, and if anybody has questions that has seen the piece or is in the Zoom room here, please feel free to submit them through the chat. So Colin's question was, in this experience, we love seeing, hearing. We have seeing, hearing, touching, reading. What about smelling or tasting?
That's a great question. So my response would be, we were trying to emulate the experience of live performance, and in live performance, it's experimental to incorporate those senses. Like, there are performances that take place in kitchens where you're like blindfolded and you're trying food and there's a show going on around you, and there are definitely performances also that you like put a smell into the theater at specific moments and whatnot, but those are already experimenting with the medium ever so slightly. And so we talked about it. We were like, what if we put like a perfume of some kind?
We did. That was like part of some of our pitch documents, actually. Yeah.
On the print material, which again, for people who saw the show this weekend, it was not in this show. If you want to see the full experience, please buy a ticket. It opens April 15th. But we talked about putting a scent on that. But then we felt like it would maybe be too much like a wedding invitation. I don't know, like a little too obvious, maybe. Yeah.
Something we'd like to do in the future that we thought a lot about. Really, actually, there was my brother, who's a composer, had suggested is actually doing wine pairings with the sommelier who would speak with the artists and like actually have kind of like an interactive experience in that way, with taste and smell with wine, but it's expensive to ship everybody wine bottles in the mail. So we were dealing with kind of those limitations as well, because, cost is one of the greatest barriers to access for classical music. Yeah. And one of our goals for this piece was to keep cost low. So in particular, so in this piece, even the immersive ticket, we've really worked hard to keep that price as low as possible to promote access. Alain asks, for me, how does working with artists/designers in other fields as equal partners in the formation of the art change your experience of music making? Ah, okay. This reminds me of Gesamtkunstwerk. Okay, yes. Okay, that's really, really interesting. I think in particular, one way I actually thought it exploded the idea of what the possibilities of art song could be for me. I actually think in a really, really, really important way. Early on, like I talked about in the presentation as we were talking earlier, Christine Shaw, like, and all of the other artists pushing back at this material and really making sure that we're not just like putting this on a pedestal and just presenting it because it's good, because it's Schubert, right? Like presenting it because it actually has a lot of intention. There's a lot of intention in the way that we're incorporating design. There's a lot of intention in the way that we're devising the narrative around it. And it was really useful for me as a theater artist to have all these incredible collaborators from across disciplines pushing back at me and being like, why is this good? And what should we mine from it? What's good about it? Oh, what's good about it is that it's personal, is that art song is a personal expression, a vulnerable expression. Great. So Jeremy, what does this mean to you, right? Like, how can we include your personal story into this work? So I think that was really interesting. And then also, as we've been talking a lot about innovation and the future in this conference, I think that that in particular, like one idea that was presented in the last talk was to create art song experiences that involve artists from other genres, which I think is a really interesting idea. But I also realized that there's a lot of other ideas, right? Like we can engage with the drag community by bringing in a drag performer to work with Schubert, right? We can engage with interactive theater makers or people that are interested in escape the rooms by bringing in immersive art. We can interact with people who appreciate design and net art by bringing in a bespoke web experience, right? That art song can involve a lot of different fields by staying true to its core, true to its essence of what makes it good, while also bringing in like other disciplines that can bring in new audiences to the work organically because they appreciate these other artistic mediums. So I hope that answers your question. Yes.
I would say just the reason why I think I don't study classical music, but I've spent a long time thinking about this now. The reason I think art song is a good tool to do that is because it is narrative, and yet it also allows for a lot of abstraction. So in that, it doesn't prescribe a method for experiencing it. You can really work with it, and which is not true for a lot of other narrative art forms.
Absolutely. Good.
More questions.
More questions. Please ask questions. Other people that are here, ask questions. We're ready for them. So I'll ask Tan a question. This is an interesting question. I'm just curious. What's your favorite part of the website?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been looking at the website for a long time this past few weeks, so I'm trying to think and distill this answer. But I think I'm going to break it down into two parts. I think the first part, the thing that's most exciting for me about the website is kind of the gallery. The photo gallery component I think is really special because something that, one of the reasons that I really love this piece when Jeremy and Callista were kind of pitching it to me was the fact that while it was kind of a product of the pandemic, it is not purely designed to be experienced during the pandemic. It is I believe that the experience stands by itself, regardless of, if people can be out and about or not. And I think what's so special about this is that the gallery is a component of this piece, which really ties together. And while you can be experiencing it in the comfort of your own home, maybe across the world from someone else who's experiencing it, these submissions really stand to remind you, and for me, as someone who's been just looking at the gallery and checking as all of these cool photos are coming in, it's almost a reassurance that, someone else is experiencing this alongside you. And I think that's really special because that is what live theater is so special, right? You're sharing this experience that you're looking at with the person sitting next to you. But in this case, I believe that this experience, once again, is just a really, really good way of challenging that and asking what other ways we can create that same feeling. And I think for me, the second part is actually, unfortunately, it wasn't in this symposium production, but it will be in the physical show because it actually has involves some of the physical components that come to your door. But there's a moment in which the audience member actually experiences very much the same thing that our protagonist Jeremy experiences in the final animation, where you actually get to paint over your face and reveal a world of Wunderlich inside of you. And I think that was really exciting, just because it was a challenge to complete technologically, but at the same time, you know, it's one of those ways that we could really bring interaction, you know, through the web to you, and hopefully allow it to, like, audience members to really resonate with what they're seeing on screen, not just in the print, but also even online.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Shantan, for driving that home.
Mhm.
And I think that those experiences that exist with the physical ephemera are a big part of the core of this piece that we weren't able to share here. Charlotte, if I could ask you for a second to just talk for a second about kind of like what the process was like devising these physical ephemera, and kind of what that means to you, and also how that connects to the augmented reality experience too.
Yeah, so in the process of taking the 12 songs and working with the team as we coming up with this narrative arc, deciding that it would be broken into 4 chapters. And then once we had that structure, there's sort of narrative work that gets done in each of those acts, sort of typical to storytelling. And so then how do you then design a physical object that has an accompanied behavior that then feeds back into this shared virtual space that connects to what was depicted in the that episode that you have just completed, both literally in terms of what you've seen, but also emotionally in terms of the journey that the protagonist is going on over the course of the film. And then similarly, how does the AR object animate, connect, make vivid an element that is in the episode that is about to begin or that you've just completed, and also reinforce the emotional transformation, the journey that the protagonist is going on. So it, again, sort of happened quite organically in terms of designing elements that would appear in the episode with an eye towards extracting those elements to be tangible for the audience. And then also crafting, filming, and then watching the film product and seeing what visual strength was coming from that, and using that as a constrained vocabulary, visual vocabulary, to then draw from to feed the AR design. So how do you iterate constantly and self-collaborate and see what you've made and use that to feed what you make, to then feed what you make? So yeah, the objects and the AR emerged sort of by necessity from the episodes and the work the episodes were doing in the narrative arc of the whole project.
Thanks.
That's maybe abstract.
No, that is
what it was.
No, that is abstract, but I think that's a helpful answer, and I think that's kind of the best way to conceptualize it. Is a lot of our process was finding abstraction in these Schubert songs and using kind of the abstraction in classical music as a jumping off point. Callista, there's been a couple questions about the development of the film narrative, whether or not there's a point, and the non-linearity of the film narrative itself. And maybe David Lynch is an inspiration. Would you like to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I don't know if many people on this call are familiar with the concept of the hero's journey, but it's a structure for creating epic narratives. So you have a hero or a heroine, and you're introduced to this character, something's going on with their life, maybe it's not the way that it needs to be. The hero then enters into another world where they meet both mentors and also foes, and then returns to reality, quote unquote, in kind of transformed and inspired. There's more to it than that, but so if you think of many big epic works, Lord of the Rings, I don't know,
Star Wars.
They're all very masculine. Unfortunately, I'd love to see more work looking at like heroines in the hero's journey. But anyway, I can't think of any that come to mind at this moment. Anyway, but that's a structure that we chose for our narrative, because we wanted to try to make it clear. So if in essence it's just you have a protagonist, the protagonist goes into a different world, meets friends, meets foes, and returns to reality inspired. If you got that from the film, that's all that we were asking you to get. And then any other interpretations about who these characters are and what this world is and what's exactly happening is totally open. We're hoping people take a lot away from this show. We could talk about what we think everything means and the choices we made, but it's not prescriptive.
And also David Lynch.
Oh, and also David Lynch. Yes. Oh, right.
You referenced that scene. That was, yeah.
Yes.
Anyway,
actually, we did think of David Lynch in the creation of this work because David Lynch often presents the ordinary things as being very strange, and there's no magical realism to his work, right? It's very realistic, and yet just weird things are happening, and we really like that tension. That's why his work's so interesting and also so unique, and we wanted to bring that into our show. There's some weird things that happen in our show that are definitely magical, but also we wanted just to create moments that feel somewhere in this liminal space between reality and wonder. And specifically in Stension.
Yeah, that's the moment the person noted,
I
which is really amazing. Yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yes, well done. So Stension was actually inspired by the theater scene in
Mulholland Drive.
Mulholland Drive. Thank
Yes.
you. I actually used that as a visual reference when I was pitching that scene. And instead of the weird blue box that appears, I forgot what that moment is. I was like, okay, I think I really want this to feel like this one moment from this David Lynch film, except the really strange thing that should happen is that the performer who's singing the song should also be in the audience. And so we have the doubling of so many characters all at once.
Yay.
Who else
Good
like
job.
to add? Anyone else like to add to that?
That's good. Charlotte? Yeah?
I just want to add super quickly because I think at least I didn't notice if it was in your setup presentation, but our thematic emphasis on wondrous strange, the tension between the strange and wonderful is from the text. So it came from the text of De Crea, which is, I'll pass that back to you, Jeremy, because
Yeah, no. The text of De Crea and also Der Leiermann. Yeah, so that that was really inspirational for us. And I guess this is important to talk about here too. Yeah, so basically we had this idea, this word wunderlich, that I was kept seeing translated as strange, I was looking into the word, and it had the root of the word is wunder, which is wonder, right? So I started investigating, and I realized that the definition of wunderlich is actually quite more complicated, and actually is closer to wondrous strange. So I started to think about it in society. Why do we look at what is strange as different or alienating, and how can we learn to see it as
translate it?
Yes, exactly. And how can we learn to see it as wondrous rather than different or strange? Yes. I can, or you can, talk about, I think this is a really interesting question about how you go about seeking funding for something like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel bad we're doing a lot of the talking.
I know, but I think, I don't know.
Funding's really important.
Funding is really important. And this piece, so the creative process of this piece began, we decided not to give ourselves constraints in that area. So we decided to imagine. We made the project really big. And then we liked it a lot. And we were like, we have to make this happen. We have to figure out how to make this happen. There's a pandemic going on, of course. So that makes things interesting and different. And we started kind of like actually, and where a lot of our funding came from was from academic institutions. So Indiana University in part, and also Yale University in part, helped fund this project. And I think that's a really important way that these institutions can contribute to innovation in art. Is when artists are trying to experiment and innovate, is to help cultivate those opportunities by funding them. And I think that's just an important thing to kind of reinforce here. Additionally, we did a lot of private fundraising, which was difficult during the pandemic in a lot of ways, but we worked really hard, and we made it happen. Also, there was a certain amount of in the previous talk, I think, was it Martha Guth? Is that right? Am I pronouncing her name correct? Yeah, she talked a little bit about the fact that she was being a waitress and had to like use her tips to fund the project, and there was a bit of that going on here as well, right? Where it's sort of like you hope that it leads to something and you build something beautiful, but you have to take some risks as well. So I think that there's that it's hard. I also want to just encourage anyone who's thinking about making something like this and is daunted by the task of fundraising, please send us an email, jeremyweissperformer@gmail.com, info@experiencethewandering.com. We will encourage you to take the risk and take the leap and make your dream a reality. Like, you can do it. You can do it. It's hard. It's going to take a lot of work.
And Jeremy, I'm going to just quickly pop in and talk about what it felt like from the other side, because there are two parts of the equation.
Yeah.
One is what you put into it, and the other is what the potential funders sense from you. And I just want to say how effective you were in making friends, in inspiring and creating a sort of a passionate love for what you were doing through a set of conversations and presentations that you were responsible for across Indiana University. So in other words, it wasn't just that you got the funding from an institution that believes in creative work or believes in innovative work. It was that you laid the groundwork for the ask. And this is absolutely critical to any fundraising anywhere, anyhow. You can never just ask for money. You always have to lay the context within which you can ask for money. And you were able to do that very beautifully. I mean, you met with any number of people, both in the Jacobs School of Music as well as off campus. You followed trails to individuals who might be interested, and you gave presentations to my entrepreneurship class, and you basically built the foundation for the point at which you can finalize the ask. Because everything that you did in anticipation of that was contextual. And I think that fundraising is all about creating a context of passion and inspiration around you.
That's really useful, and I think that conversations like this for students who are trying to imagine, I think it's important for them to hear this side of things. The other piece of advice that I give to students is to find collaborators that are outside of your field and make relations with them as well, because they're amazing and going to help you reconceptualize the way that your art form exists in the world, like all these wonderful collaborators that are on this call here. And I think that that's really important. I think a lot of conservatory students stay just in their bubble of fellow vocalists or trombonists or violinists, right? And I think that I hope that a lot of people will build connections outside of those circles, because I think it was because of those connections that we were able to build this piece.
I also just want to jump in and give you a little reflection from the outside, since you've invoked collaborators. I also would say that, Jeremy, you've done an excellent job of, and you and Callista's like so deep in it that, but I think both of you did a fantastic job of having this thing be your baby, and you were going to drive it and work so hard to make it beautiful and real. So simultaneously holding on to having it be your baby, and then also having the generosity of spirit to let your collaborators bring their energy and their ideas and contribute, instead of being like, you shared authorship in a way that I think is quite rare, actually, in collaborative projects like this. So I just want to give you that feedback from my side of the table.
I think that it comes with the idea that you, Charlotte, and you, Callista, and you, Tantan, are a lot better at what you guys do than I am, right? And so I think that in a collaborative process, you have to have collaborators that you trust, that you listen to, that you know are experts, kind of in that process. So that's, thanks for saying that, Charlotte. So, I think I think we should wrap it up here, and I think that's
Tantan, or we're being only okay moderators. Before we wrap up, should we ask if anyone has any specific questions for Tantan or Charlotte? If not, we can.
From the audience, from anybody else in the Zoom room?
Anything about the show?
Or anything else about the show? Next projects. That's a good question.
Oh yeah. Charlotte and Tantan, can you share with us what are your next projects? Tantan, go first.
Sure. That's a good question. I don't really know. I think it's gonna be interesting just because like this experience has been the most crazy, hectic, most rewarding thing that I've ever done, probably in my life, especially artistically. And so it's going to be, it's cliche to say, but like it's going to be hard to top, right? So I think the next project is going to be just exploring kind of what I've taken from this project and seeing how I can apply it to my everyday life, right? I think what was really cool is like, for example, you know, I also have a full-time job as I'm doing this. So it's been kind of crazy to be switching kind of my brain outside of work and then back to work. And so now I think I'm just going to take some time to really explore and see what kind of art I can make personally. I've just learned so much from literally every single person on this team. It's been insane, even though sometimes we've been doing stuff in parallel and we haven't really been seeing each other's work. Like just watching it all come together, like it's been the most amazing thing. And so I'm just looking forward to kind of just digesting it. I haven't had time to process it yet, so it's just going to be a time of reflection, I think, after this.
Yay.
Charlotte?
I think that's well said. I resonate with that. Next projects for me, I normally work on climate change. Lots of fun. I work on climate change and material innovation and the narratives we use to hold on to climate change from a design perspective. So more stuff in that vein. Can't be too specific about it, but the psychological experience of climate grief is probably going to be entering more into the work. And I also have ducks, so I'm doing lots of experiments around these guys. My ducks are sometimes on my Zoom calls. I've rescued some ducks, so I'm thinking about carbon sheds, and they're going to molt their winter feathers, and maybe I'll make something very cool out of their winter feathers. I won't say more than that.
That sounds very cool.
Yes. Callista?
Oh no! Oh no. Okay, well, next projects. I'm hoping to help this project grow. I would love for this to have a run internationally. Obviously, we're working with German composer. It'd be amazing to have a run in Europe. It would be amazing to have a run in China. It'd be elsewhere. This whole show can be translated. Art song is appreciated across the world. That would be really cool.
Yeah, I think there is definitely potential for The Wandering to grow beyond this. If anybody else has ideas or can help, please let us know.
Let us know, please.
And kind of the idea is that potentially a European run, or potentially that we would do more work with it domestically, kind of working with different community organizations or universities or schools. Additionally, I mean, we've built a community around this piece, a community of artists. So we are hoping also to potentially develop more work together as
funding
as time moves along. So I guess that's a great place to wrap up. Again, you guys can, again, Netflix, maybe, we'll see, maybe Netflix wants to do an immersive experience with Schubert's art song or somebody else's art song. That'd be cool. So what I wanted to say is, like, remember that the immersive ticket is available on our website, experiencethewandering.com. I hope that you guys will help us spread the word about the show to your communities. There is, you can like us on Facebook, share us, Experience the Wandering, and Instagram. And thank you all so much for participating in The Wandering and for allowing The Wandering to be part of this summit. It meant a lot to me, and it meant a lot to the whole team. So thank you so much to Alain and all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tantan. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
We'll stay on the call in case anybody else wants to talk.
Yeah.
Right. Charlotte.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Bye.
Take care,
Thank
all.
you so much. Thank you, Tantan and Charlotte,
Bye-bye.
Jeremy, Callista. Absolutely incredible.